Welcome to the broadcast, my fruits. Today we are going to focus mainly on the catastrophic high-speed car chase that hurtled through Manhattan and sent everyone into shockwaves. It was like a scene out of Who's That Girl, with Madonna and Griffin Dunn taking to the streets in a great big flurry and panic and evading all the nasty villains. We're going to look at that. I'm also going to clarify some comments that I made about Omid Scobie in a previous broadcast and his accounts that he's given to the High Court. That's towards the end of this broadcast. But I want to begin just with a little palate cleanser of a lovely royal moment, please, before we go on to the vulgarity. And actually, this star-studded reception for the Prince's Trust that the King hosted was the kind of scene that the Harkles could have been a part of, with celebrities and stars and a rich variety, a gorgeous variety of those who are helping the Prince's Trust ambassadors for it and those who have benefited from it. You know, some of the many millions that have benefited from the Prince's Trust for all these decades, clamouring and clambering to be next to the King and to show respect. And it was a fruity gathering. It was gorgeous. There was so much goodwill, so much love. We see the King's new style of doing things. Curtsies galore. It was so nice as he curtsies. So much respect paid, even from this modern mix of generations, but also including a young crowd, showing due deference in a modern setting. It was lovely. Jerry Halliwell, another spicy ginger, you know, and we all love Jerry, don't we? But she always pounces on the King. She always plants loads of smackers all over him. Of course, they've got this relationship and have done for a few decades, but you know, it is heartwarming, it is lovely. But please, Jenny dear, please do remember you can kiss and curtsy. You can do both. So let's not forget the curtsy. The King is certainly not complaining that you're kissing him, but remember that he is the King, he is a monarch. Bear that in mind. Darling, 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 Charlie Tilbury was there, the makeup guru. I love her to bits, I truly do. And she loves the King to bits. She was crying at his coronation. She tells us she was in tears, and she gave a lovely buxom curtsy, as many of them did. And this could have been the kind of situation and the kind of event that the Harkles could have been involved with, ambassadors for the Commonwealth, but no, they were too hoity-toity for all of that, thought they could do it better, thought that America, land of dreams, would be kinder to them with regards to paparazzi, but it turns out that they might have been safer here in the kingdom where they're protected, and you don't see that kind of footage or high-speed chases emerging with regards to William and Catherine now, do you, since the Leveson inquiry. Oh dear. Gorgeous Oti Mabuse was there, looking absolutely lovely, as were a smattering of stars such as Anton Deck and the delicious Jamie Winston, who looked ravishing and is an absolute delight. And the King also received Humza Yousaf, the First Minister of Scotland, in audience. I'd also like to say, as an aside, for those of you that enjoy watching old footage, I watched a wonderful video this week of the Prince of Wales as he was just before his investiture in Wales. He was interviewed. I guess he was 21 years old, and I'll leave the link in the description box. But just for those of you that like to look back and compare, it is a wonderful example of Prince Charles and his maturity at such a young age. And I think if you don't understand his personality or might be a bit cynical about him, seeing how erudite, how lucid, how mature, how engaged he was at such a young age, how he was able to present himself and speak so very beautifully. And I have to say that kind of voice is one of those things about Britain that is vanishing and diminishing over the years. That wonderful voice of his that speaks so beautifully. And as he said, he would have made a really rather fabulous actor had he gone into that kind of profession, as he mentions in the interview. But it's worth a watch for those of you that like to look at that sort of detail. A wonderful man. And I have to say, even though I've said before that perhaps that wasn't his most attractive face physically, he's gorgeous. Even when his ears looked rather large compared to the rest of his face, he was lovely. I have to say, absolutely up my street with exquisite complexion. Well, I'll leave that in your hands, but for now, we have the Royal Bugler in town. Yes, the Royal Bugler of Montecito made a statement. So I want to put together my summary of what we have seen over the last couple of days with this catastrophe, and you can make of it what you will. But I will start with the statement that came from the Royal Bugler of Montecito, a spokesperson for the Sussexes. And can I ask, firstly, I don't understand who this statement was addressed to. If they have this kind of complaint, why are they parading it around to the world? Why can't it be addressed to an official complaints bureau for the press, for the the freelance photographers or the agencies in America? This is what I don't understand. Last night, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex and Miss Ragland were involved in a near-catastrophic car chase at the hands of a ring of highly aggressive paparazzi. This relentless pursuit, lasting over 2 hours, resulted in multiple near collisions involving other drivers on the road, pedestrians, and 2 NYPD officers. While being a public figure comes with a level of interest from the public, it should never come at the cost of anyone's safety. Dissemination of these images, given the way in which they were obtained, encourages a highly intrusive practice that is dangerous to all involved. Well, the first thing that strikes many of us is this Diana skew, isn't it? It's this relentless reimagining of Meghan's story as Diana's story, as a kind of reincarnation, the new Diana, Lilibet Diana, mixing the two as if they are the same persecuted heroine, when in fact they are absolutely not. Now, we have heard 2 sides to the story so far, or several sides. What I am interested in, because I am eager to see that video cameras are going to be the judge and the jury, and perhaps they will come to back up some of the Harkle's claims, but perhaps they will not, and many people have been thrown doubt on this. So I'm so interested, because we hear that there is going to be a review including video footage. So I'm curious, very curious, to see how this relentless 2-hour plus pursuit and car chase pans out. Well, I agree, simply from looking at the footage and knowing what we know and looking at the cameras, I agree that there is a level of intensity, of course there is, surrounding celebrities and the principals as they are known. But is it manageable? And if it is not, who are they hiring? Because there are other questions here. Who are they hiring to do their safety procedures? Who is doing their strategy for this? And why do they seem so very well prepared to make a demonstration of their complaints about the press and paparazzi with their video cameras recording what's going on? There are various things that we have to take into consideration here when making a judgment call. And also, how does it compare with their treatment at the hands of the British press? The awful British press that were hounding them. And I understand that people from all over the globe pay for these photographs of the Harkles, but this is happening in America, not on these shores. And the question remains, if there was danger and great peril, did their own behaviour exacerbate it? Or did the behaviour of their own staff? Well, New York Police Department released their own statement saying on Wednesday evening, May 16th, the NYPD assisted the private security team protecting the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. There were numerous photographers that made their transport challenging. So they agree that there were challenges. But the Duke and Duchess of Sussex arrived at their destination and there were no reported collisions, summonses, injuries or arrests in regard. So it seems you could read that as they are downplaying the drama. And I think that is my personal takeaway from all of this, that something occurred, there was some sort of friction, but perhaps we are getting a warped recollection that might vary with a dramatic twist. Time will tell. Video captures may tell. One question that strikes me is that surely, with all their years of experience and their experienced security, surely it is not that difficult to smuggle them and employ a bit of subterfuge. And I know they tried this by leaping into various yellow taxis, but surely it isn't that difficult to leave discreetly and get until they are out of the vicinity. And you might say, well, it's not easy for them because they are these big stars, they're tracked this, that and the fourth. But I'm sorry, there were lots of people leaving that venue. There were lots of people that could take them backstage, as I'm sure they were at some point. And I'm sure there were lots of different vehicles leaving the venue. And I'm sure they had time to arrange the smuggling out. And it is sad that they might have to resort to being smuggled out in the back of a van or some scenery transit van, whatever it is. And I realise that things get leaked, but there must have been a way that it could have been done, because surely they would have expected this cacophony of photographers, because no one's doubting the fact that there were photographers and that they want their picture and that they want their pound of flesh. But was it really not possible for them to put all their heads together, the security to put their heads together, and to come up with some kind of plan to foil the press? Surely it doesn't require that much expertise honestly, the way that this event has transpired, you know, these two are coming over as if they are Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor on some kind of wild goose chase, my dear, some getaway disaster. It's not necessary. Well, Chris Sanchez of their security team made the unusual move of being permitted to speak to CNN, and he says, "I have never experienced anything like this. What we were dealing with was very chaotic. There were about a dozen vehicles, cars, scooters and bicycles. The public were in jeopardy at several points. It could have been fatal. They were jumping curbs, red lights, and at one point they blocked the limousine and started taking pictures until we were able to get out." Well, that's his version of events. There are other versions of events, which we will come to, and I, at this point, am not casting my own opinion on which can be perceived as true. Eric Adams, the New York mayor, who I was interested to see, is a Democrat, and sorry to generalize, but we all know that that side of the political field tend to have more sympathy with the likes of the Harkles than Republican politicians, let's put it that way, in the world of politics. I'm not talking about generally, because there is variety in both. But he says, "I would find it very hard to believe there was a 2-hour high-speed chase." Now, you can interpret what he said various ways. I think he was very fair. He seems to want to suspend any judgment until we see further investigation or video footage. He also made it very clear that even if it was a 10-minute high-speed chase, that would be totally unacceptable. He was very compassionate towards them, but also seemed to raise an eyebrow at some of the drama of the claims. A taxi driver who picked them up during this chase and was with them for 10 minutes or so, and he picked them up at the height of the incident, suggested that it had not been a chase and none of them had been in danger. So do you see how we are being presented different stories, and all the stories that suggest it was highly dramatic and highly dangerous come from the Harkle field? Because at one point in this chase, in a failed attempt to create a decoy, oh, what geniuses they are, they swapped their own SUV for a yellow taxi, but then they were swiftly identified and photographed. So, oh drats, that didn't work, we thought we'd fooled them. I mean, you know, they could have worked this out in advance. A source close to the couple, who could that be, said that they had been forced to seek refuge in a police station on 3 separate occasions, as they had been forced to shake off the photographers. Well, as you might have seen, Harry also appears to film the photographers on his mobile phone during this. Perhaps it's because they need genuine footage of photographers after them, because as we all know, during their Netflix documentary, they used stock images from the Harry Potter premiere. And their production team said, this is usual, this is what happens in documentaries. Well, perhaps it is, but it also paints a rather abstract sketch, doesn't it? A memoir, the art of memoir. Well, on the one hand, I'm sure Prince Harry was dismayed to find himself surrounded by photographers peering through the windows, but on the other hand, aha, I have my moment, footage. And then perhaps he can even get a cameraman credit when the next Netflix extravaganza emerges, photography by Prince Harold. Well, it is understood that the 3 of them were staying with friends. They were due to stay with friends nearby at a friend's house, but they felt unable to return as they were being followed. So they waited it out, apparently, to lose the paparazzi, and eventually made it back after midnight, 12:30. As I said, Mayor Adams was very considerate in what he said so far, and he also admitted that 2 of his officers could have been injured. They weren't, to my knowledge, but they could have been injured. He said we have to be extremely responsible. He threw doubt on that 2-hour car chase, but we will find out the exact duration. That's what I find interesting. You know, I also found interesting the testimony from the taxi driver, yes. Step into the spotlight, Mr. Singh. They were in his yellow taxi for about 10 minutes. He said, I don't think I would call it a chase. It never felt like I was in danger. Never felt like I was in danger. It wasn't like a car chase in a movie, They were quiet and seemed scared, but it's New York, it's safe. And this just makes me feel, when I see that they are being pursued in some sense, it just brings it home to me, their own personality, their histrionic personality that seems rather paranoid, dramatic, the persecution complex. It all piles everything on, doesn't it, into the mix. They spent 75 minutes trying to lose the paparazzi as they were driven across 57th Street and other streets, and they were escorted at all times by an NYPD police car. The taxi driver also told the BBC that he did not think that the paparazzi were being aggressive. New York is the safest place to be, he says. The paps were behind us, they kept their distance. Well, I see no reason why he would have to lie about that, and he seems like a sweet guy. It was his moment in the sun, and he earned a tip of $33. They chucked him a $50 for the $17 fee. He says, they gave me a $50. I mean, when I'm only going around the block, that's more than enough. So that was a good payday for him, especially if he earned some fees for sharing his story. But I would very much doubt that he could have been coerced into telling Porky Pies about the gravity of the situation. So at first look, I'm inclined to believe what he says about it not being quite so dramatic. Not quite so much movement, so much violent intent. But who knows? That could be proved very wrong in the wake of video footage. I'm sure there must be plenty of it covering New York. He says that they eventually left his cab when... and this is what puts me in mind of Who's That Girl? You know, Madonna racing around town in her heels. Except she did it fabulously, but... they left when a garbage truck approached and appeared in front of them. This garbage truck appeared and they thought, oh, let's scram, let's get out of here. Probably loving the movie moment, weren't they? This is what they love, the adrenaline, that dopamine fix. We're under attack. Oh, we're such big stars, they need us. On the other side of the lollipop, to be fair, Bruce Kotler of the Press of New York Press Photographers Association said the way that the photographers are alleged to have acted would violate the basic photojournalism principle of covering news as documentarians and observers, and also the code of ethics, especially if they are members of that association, or indeed if they are simply self-respecting photographers. They should be adhering to this particular code, and suggests that if these allegations are true, then they would have violated the code. So I certainly do bear that in mind as well. No codes should be breached. People should act responsibly and carefully. But that also includes those who are reporting on the incident. And we have to be careful that people are not putting dramatic spins on events and reporting things soberly and rationally and not hysterically. Backgrid have also released a statement, and as I have always said, I have never believed that Backgrid are tipped off by Harry and Meghan. And I think if they were in regular receipt of being tipped off by Harry and Meghan, then they wouldn't have released this statement in the first place, because they would have been betraying one of their chief informants. So my information is that they are not tipped off by the Harkles. If they are tipped off by leaks or anybody else in their camp, that is a different story. I'm happy to be, if I'm ever proved wrong, then I will eat my words, but I stand by my volition there, and this statement seems to back my hunch up. I will flash up their statement. I won't read the whole thing, but the highlights of it basically say that Backgrid are aware of the Harkles' statement of this near catastrophic car chase, and they want to clarify that they received photographs and videos from 4 freelance photographers, 3 in cars and 1 on a bicycle. Of course there were others there, but they're talking about their freelancers. And according to their freelancers' accounts, 1 of the 4 SUVs from Prince Harry's security escort was driving in a manner that could be perceived as reckless. The vehicle was seen blocking off streets, and in one video is seen being pulled over by the police. These photographers have reported feeling that the couple was not in any immediate danger at any point, but they are taking it seriously and they will be investigating the matter thoroughly. So that's very interesting, isn't it? Not what many people might suspect from back grid. They are pointing the finger quite squarely at one of the Harkle's drivers, and this seems to be emerging, that perhaps he wasn't the most experienced, or even if he wasn't making the best decisions on behalf of the Harkles. So is he receiving some ire from the Harkle camp too for his part in this? I'm not casting aspersions, I am reporting aspersions that have been made. And another anonymous paparazzi photographer told Good Morning Britain that he also blamed their driver on making it a catastrophic experience. So I understand that it's a bit of he said, she said at this point in time. So I am happy to hold tight and wait for further clarification and hopefully some video evidence. I would also like to clarify and hold forth a little more on comments I made with regards to Omid Scobie's appearance at Harry's trial, where I mentioned that it was my understanding that it was indeed, and I could accept what Omid Scobie says about voicemail hacking being rather de rigueur, people would turn a blind eye to it and accept it in that industry at that time. I want to make clear that I didn't say within that entire segment that I believe every word that Omid Scobie says. The only things I was saying I'm inclined to believe is that what I just said, I'm inclined to accept the voicemail hacking was not unusual, and that secondly, he is not a personal friend of the Harkles. And before anybody jumps in, leaving comments, hear me out before you start disproving that theory. Some quarters have suggested that it wouldn't have been possible at all for Omid Scobie on some work placement or experience to have been privy to such goings on. Well, I am not saying one way or the other whether Omid Scobie invented the conversation about Kylie Minogue and James Gooding's voicemails, or whether he was telling the truth, lie or truth. I'm not saying either way. What I am saying is that I think that kind of activity was prolific during that period, and what I'm also saying is that I know from personal experience that you absolutely can be taken into the confidence of those around you. Particularly in his era, this was going back, 20 years or so, when there was no social media, there was no voices online, you couldn't go tittle-tattling to anybody online. Yes, the internet was in existence, but not social media as we know it these days. So people got away with a lot more. A lot more went under the radar. You couldn't call out people and cancel them online at that period. So there's that to take into consideration. But I take into consideration my own first work experience placement when I was at school. I guess I was 13, 14 years old. I did a couple of weeks at a theatre, a local regional theatre. A very old, wonderfully English old kind of theatre, going back hundreds of years. I think it was the theatre. It was gorgeous. I can conjure up the smell of it in my mind right now. But I was there in the publicity department, and I was sat with I was placed with a rather legendary figure on the scene, a woman with fiery red hair, a publicity officer at this theatre, and she had been installed there for decades. But I was placed with her. It was wonderful. And within one day, even though I was only there for 2 weeks, so I guess that was 10 days in total, or was it 2 or 3 weeks? Within one day, we were like busy mates, and I was only 13 or 14 at the time. And it was just me and her in the office. I would stuff envelopes, loads and loads of envelopes, flyers, leaflets, pamphlets. And then gradually she'd involve me in other stuff, and because I was very keen, very eager, and she was rather gossipy, and I rather like a little gossip. And she was a very, very professional woman, but I was in her confidence by the end of the 2 weeks, and I had access to so much material, all the stars that would come into the theatre, that there was a little black book she would give me all the time with their phone numbers, email addresses, home addresses, mainly stars of the British stage, but I'm talking big names, but also some international stars as well. And she would get off to the phone to many of them, turn around to me and fill me in with a little bit of gossip. Well, I suppose you could say that, okay, she wasn't entirely professional, but not everybody in the industry is, my dear. And most people like a bit of a gossip in that industry and many other industries that I've worked over. Anything from trading to public affairs to cafe shop counters, coffee shop. I mean, gossip is gossip. It's pretty much rife anywhere you go, isn't it, my dear? And I'm sure there are places where it's all hush-hush and the work experience people are kept at bay. But in my case, I was not kept at bay, and I was brought into some competencies, professional, unprofessional, whatever. And so all I am saying to you is that it is not out in left field for Omid Scobie to have overheard such conversations, and in a moment I will address specifically his claims with regards to what he overheard to do with Kylie Minogue and James Gooding, because I am the one with encyclopedic knowledge about Kylie Minogue. First of all, I never said that Omid Scobie had never met one or both of the Sussexes, merely that I accept that he does not have a friendship or regularly sees them or has their number. That's what he says. I believe him, and that is what I've always said, that he's not some intimate. Yes, we are told in Finding Freedom, as many of you pointed out, that Harry confessed to me at a small drinks gathering at our hotel that he wished he were a normal guy. Well, things to consider there are that this does not mean that he is a friend of the Harkles, nor does it mean that he is a mouthpiece. You know, that word is used. If you want to describe it as a mouthpiece, I get it. Of course I do. But for me, it is the same as those who would come here, and it has been done when they've accused me as being a mouthpiece for the royal family, when I am not their official royal spokesman, and sadly I'm not Catherine's best friend. But people do accuse me of that. They come here and disparage me for that. Some even think that I am a paid influencer for the royal family. I mean, I'm not even going to bother denying this kind of thing, but I get that all the time. So if he's a mouthpiece, I'm a mouthpiece. It's better than being called a ring piece, I suppose. But yes, these small drinks at a hotel, well, this is not dissimilar to any royal correspondent. All of them have stories like these. I've heard Jenny Bond, I've heard Phil Dampier. Take your pick, my tits. Any royal correspondent or journalist will have stories like this, where they are in a certain pool of reportage. So if it is in the context of work when they had this cosy drink at a hotel, and I must admit I haven't read Finding Freedom, so I don't know the context, I admit that, but then you can't call that socialising, really. That, well, I suppose you can, but, you know, that's mixing business with pleasure, isn't it? It's still business. So I understand what Omid Scobie says if he says that he doesn't socialise with them, because if they were there under the umbrella of work, then fair enough. But what I should say, you know, if that is the case, then I don't accept that he perjured, but I think he was egging the pudding to try and paint a closer picture of his association with Harry in Finding Freedom. And I certainly think he would have been wise to mention that incident so that it was framed properly in the High Court. So that when he said, I don't socialise, I don't have a friendship, you know, I've met them through work, or I've met Harry, we shared a drink together, where he confessed something. Well, was that during an interview? You know, it could have just been a royal official interview where they happened to be at a hotel drinking something, and Harry told Mr. Scobie that he were a normal guy. So I'm just trying to draw the differences here. Now, I want to hold forth a little more on the subject of Kylie Minogue here and James Gooding, and you might want to zone out and switch off if you're not going to find this interesting, but I find it interesting because I have a vested interest in Kylie Minogue. She's one of my specialist subjects. You know, if I was to appear on Mastermind, and there's a smattering of female icons, if you will, that I am rather encyclopedic about, especially of their earlier years. I'm thinking some of the old Hollywood stars of the 40s, Judy Garland, for example, then going through some in the 60s, some in the 70s. Debbie Harry is one that I know pretty much everything about. There's always more to discover. Debbie Harry, Madonna, Courtney Love. Courtney Love is one of my absolute heroes. And Kylie Minogue, particularly her earlier years, is something that I know a lot about. So I feel I can speak on this era. And because it's involving stories with her boyfriend James Gooding at the time, who she'd been with for 2 or 3 years. And I know about, and I've seen in the archives, stories from that time that were unusual for Kylie Minogue because she was very good at protecting her privacy. She was never involved in huge scandals, pretty much because she's rather clean living, but she always had a string of boyfriends. She always has. And that always garnered a lot of press attention and coverage, you know, a very desirable, beautiful woman. And there was one flurry of stories as her relationship with James Gooding came to an end. One in particular where she was crying outside her flat in South Kensington, Drayton Gardens, actually. Not there anymore, but the penthouse flat, gorgeous at Drayton Gardens. And there were some blurry photographers of them, tear-stained. Him hammering, because he was going through, and he admitted himself when he sold his story, I think it was on a cocktail of various things at that time, including cocaine, knocking at her intercom, buzzing at the intercom, let me in, let me in. Various stories were coming out. I'm mentioning this for a reason. Because what Omid says is that Mr. Morgan, Piers Morgan, was asking how confident various reporters were in the reporting of their story about Kylie Minogue and James Gooding. And Mr. Morgan was told that the information had come from voicemails. He does not say that it had come from hacked voicemails. It says it had come from voicemails. Now, that could mean that they were hacked, or it could mean that they were played, that voicemails of Kylie were played to Piers Morgan. And I am not suggesting that this is the case, only that it's a question of semantics. And James Gooding is one of the rare people the rare boyfriends of Kylie Minogue that sold his story. And because I know about her life, I know who sold their story. And she's had a string of wonderful boyfriends, gorgeous boyfriends, some of them. But one who sold their story was James Gooding, soon after they broke up, and he sold it to a tabloid, and I believe it was News of the World. News of the World, who were involved in an international hacking scandal. So that is where the possibility of hacking comes in there as well. He admitted in his story that he cheated on Kylie Minogue with the model Sophie Dahl, with the actress Davinia Taylor, all kinds of vulgar things that she certainly didn't deserve. Another one to betray Kylie Minogue's confidence was her dancer from the 1980s, Venel John, who appeared with her in lots of videos. And it's never been confirmed whether or not he was lying or if indeed they did have a relationship, but he sold his story about their wild encounters. You can use your imagination. Jean-Claude Van Damme is another who shocked a few people because decades after their movie together, Street Fighter, where she appeared as Cammy, he confirmed they had had a fling. She was a very busy girl and had a lot of fun while looking like butter wouldn't melt. It's another thing I love about the girl. She had some beautiful men in her time. She also had some rather the occasional odd choice, such as the actor Pauly Shore, because he is another one that went to the press years after their encounter when they worked together on the movie Biodome. That must have been a very bored location movie set. Or perhaps he had some hidden talents. Anyway, he ended up revealing his story of his dalliance with her and how she ended up dumping him quite unceremoniously, as she had also done to poor Jason Donovan, who was her first famous boyfriend. She also dated Michael Hutchence for a few years, Stefan Sednawi, Randy Gerber, the actor, Joshua Sass, who she was engaged to, and that ended rather nastily. Olivier Martinez, absolutely gorgeous Frenchman, stunning. Paul Solomons, another wonderful fashion editor, ended recently. Andrea Velencoso, another one, wow. And she was dating him at the time that he was, I think, the best paid male supermodel in the world and absolutely divine. He's done some very revealing shoots as well in the past. No wonder she wanted to get her hands on him. Gorgeous. There. And also Rupert Penry Jones. And they are just a glimpse of the roster of men that she's dated over the years. And very few of them betrayed her. James Gooding did. So the reason I'm going into that detail and bringing it to your attention is because I found the semantics of what Omid Scobie said. The information had come from voicemails. That could very well mean that voicemails were hacked. But it could also mean that the voicemails that Piers Morgan was referring to are ones that had been played to him by associates of Kylie, whether that was James Gooding or somebody else. But James Gooding did go on to sell his story. So I just draw that to your attention because it tantalises. The semantics of it tantalise. But another little palate cleanser to finish, I think. We can wash our hands of all that muck for today, because Princess Eugenie, Her Royal Highness, involving her work with the anti-slavery collective that she co-founded years ago, before it became a hot topic, she co-founded it. Well, she visited the Archbishop's School in Canterbury alongside the Right Reverend Rose Hudson Wilkin, the Bishop of Dover, to learn about the school's Voices of Welcome project. And she looked lovely, and it's nice to see her blooming and blossoming and having a very healthy pregnancy. We're excited to see who comes along as a little brother or sister for Augie Porgy, aren't we, my dear? And another little Brooksbank. We need some sunny joy. So that will be nice to look forward to, and I look forward to seeing you in the next broadcast. Let's see what's going to transpire between now and then. We shall see, my dear. Thank you for keeping me company. Thank you for some juicy comments. And if you'd like to leave me a tip, my privy purse is in the description box. Thank you. Over and out, and toodle pip.